So welcome everyone to New Jersey Dam's virtual webinar. My name is Frank DiCarlo, and today New Jersey Dam will be discussing metadata automation, and with an amazing group of panelists, I might add. We'll introduce them in a second. There's a lot to cover, but before I begin, I'd like to introduce the New Jersey Dam team. For without them, none of this would be happening. Deb Fanslow and Ron Gill. Unfortunately, Ron Gill won't be joining us today. He had something come up suddenly, unfortunately. But Deb, I trust you're here.
I am.
Excellent. How are you?
I'm very happy to be here. We talked about this topic for a while, following up on our basic Metadata 101 webinar, and the expertise we have on our panel is pretty astounding.
I agree. Why don't you just start with a brief introduction for yourself, Deb?
Sure. My current role, I'm working as a digital asset librarian / content steward with Aquin Studios. So I'm a contractor embedded on site with Merck and doing half DAM, half content management, working with their promotional content. And my background is really library science, and also coming in from the creative field, working in the publishing arena as an art director in various roles. So part creative, part librarian. It lends itself well to a DAM career.
Terrific. Thank you, Deb.
Sure.
Let's put up the agenda, give everybody a little bit of a summary of what we're going to be covering today, so everybody's in the know. We're going to leave the last 15 minutes to some questions. I hope that we have 15 minutes. It's a packed agenda with some terrific people. That'll be when the live audience that's with us tonight, welcome everybody, can ask your questions. You can do that via chat function. If you move around your cursor, you can see the different things that are going on with this technology in Zoom, or you can raise your hand, and that means that you would like to join the panel and use the video capabilities and be able to ask firsthand. But that'll be in the last segment of what we're doing. But let's introduce our panel. Spencer, are you with us?
Yeah, I'm here.
Excellent. You want to give us a little background on yourself?
Sure. I mean, as my bio reads, I've been doing this for close to 10 years now. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. Been here for just a little over a year now. I work for an advertising agency as their full-time dedicated DAM manager. When I got here, they didn't really have a DAM in play, and so I've been spending the last 14 months building out our strategy and deploying the system that we're using now. Prior to that, I was in San Francisco and worked for internally for a corporate retailer that had their own on-site photo studio and developed their systems for them to use for their workflows and manage their content that way.
Fantastic. Thank you, Spencer. Welcome. Peter.
Hi, everybody. This is Peter. I have a pretty varied background, but it's been pretty consistently tied to DAM for, I think, over 20 years now. Originating in the publishing industry, bringing in like the first DAM system for Newsweek, working directly with several different DAM vendors with their software and working with their client base. My current company is a company called Picture Park, and I'm responsible for working with the client side of things and helping to put together their solutions and configure a workflow process in our software to meet all of those needs. So there's a whole bunch of things that tie into that. I have a good background in digital photography, working in photography studios, and also in magazine publishing, CD, cover art, work, and many other things, but that one common thread has sort of always been the digital asset management side of things.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter, and thank you for your continued support. David, you with us?
Yep, I'm here.
Excellent.
I kind of came into DAM through the back door. I started out as a photographer, and back in the mid-90s, got involved using Photoshop and discovered the file info panel, and then discovered I could put stuff in there. And then when I cataloged that in some early digital asset management programs, it would transfer across, and put together something called controlled vocabulary to help others deal with keywording issues in a more consistent manner. And the work I'd done with that somehow brought me to the attention of Adobe and the IPTC at the time that they were making the jump going to this thing called XMP. So kind of got in on the ground floor of that and made the observation that, hey, there's no user manual for this, and so that became my task. So and there's lots of other things since then, but that's what most people seem to know me from.
Fantastic. Thank you, David. And Mark, better known as according to this technology.
Yes. Hi.
Hey,
Zoom
Mark.
seems to, despite editing the profile back to say Mark, it seems to not take. Maybe it caches it for today.
Yeah.
I'm currently independent consultant, helping people that are in the midst of looking at systems, help them select technology, or with workflow or metadata. I've worked as a consultant for more than 15 years. I've worked in a variety of digital asset management implementations, quite a few in publishing, as well as retail and healthcare and other implementations.
Terrific. Thank you, Mark, for being here.
Thank you.
All right. As we had said, there's a lot to cover, so let's get into it. So first things first. Why do we need metadata for a DAM system? Well, metadata, simply put, is defined as keywords or searchable information that describes said data and what in turn creates that piece of content into an asset. Metadata is critical in managing digital assets, which by their nature are visual. So entering that, or entering what allows one to discover it, is imperative and important. So ultimately, we find that asset quicker. In the end, that's what we're really looking for, to access what we need as quickly as we can. I encourage everyone to watch, if you haven't, the last virtual meetup that MJ Dam conducted, Why Metadata Rocks, with Heidi Quicksilver, the digital archivist of Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, for more on Metadata 101. And actually, that last recording and that last webinar is what prompted our panel discussion today and can be found on our YouTube channel. She alludes to it and spawned today's topic, how to streamline and help automate much of the function in entering metadata, and where a manual process can be improved. So, Deb, why do we need to automate the population of metadata?
Because the only people in the world who enjoy cataloging assets are information professionals, and the rest of us have jobs to do. And the volume and the velocity of content being created today, simply, it's just not scalable for many people and organizations to just keep up with the amount of metadata that's required to support discoverability and all the other reasons why they have their DAM for distribution purposes and sharing assets out to their users. So obviously, to streamline our workflows and reduce the pain and spreading it around, we do everything we can to get that valuable metadata into our DAM system so that it can enable search and retrieval and discovery and archiving and every other purpose you can think of. And it's really the gold of the system. I mean, the DAM, as they say, is only as good as your metadata. So it's in everyone's best interest to automate it. Frequently, a lot of the users who are closest to the content are not content management professionals, and they're often creative professionals, and they have absolutely no interest and no time for metadata. So especially upstream, we want to get that metadata in the system as easily and as quickly and automatically as possible. So leading to the last bullet, how can we automate? I'm going to just use that as the segue into the next slides, because we pretty much outline a few of the ways that our panelists have done such magical deeds in the past and automated metadata through various methods.
Very good. Thank you, Deb.
Sure.
Metadata tips and tricks. Spencer, I think you have a couple of thoughts on that, no?
Yeah, so one of the things that we're starting to do here with our DAM, or that I've done, and this wasn't an original idea, so I can't take credit for it, shared by another DAM expert, but with our DAM, the way that I've configured it is that anytime it picks up on a new asset or a new asset's been ingested, I have a a custom data field. It doesn't embed because I don't need the information to travel with the file outside of the system, but it's called review status. And what it'll do is anytime a new asset comes in, it tags it as new. So then I can run a quick query on any given day and see what content is considered new. Then I can go through and check for what the metadata currently looks like on those assets and know what holes I may need to fill before I check them off as completed. I know some workflows that the only way for the assets to be available to users is that it has to go through that vet process first, visible. The system we're using right now, we haven't configured that level of restriction, so users can still go in and see the content and access the content and search for it based on current metadata that's in there, but their ability to find can sometimes be a little limited because the metadata may not be very thorough, as Deb mentioned, because a lot of these guys that are loading the content or creatives, they're putting as minimal effort into it as possible. So, one thing we are looking at is building a required upload form. We have an account service team, so again, working for an ad agency, we have an account service team that works as the liaison between our clients and the creative department, and a lot of times they're initial recipients of content that the client wants us to use on a project. And so we're in the process of discovery for an upload or a ingest process they would use, and minimally what we're requiring metadata from them are the client name, who the client is, this content is associated with, the job number it's being initially supplied for, because it may be reused over multiple jobs, but we need to know the original job it's being submitted for, that job number and that job name, and those three things right there can already help us really quickly get to that content 6 months from now when the client refers back to it.
Very good.
One thing we forgot to mention, we've kind of structured this presentation in order of complexity. And so we start out with, the basic metadata that everyone has and can leverage, and then we move into the folder structures and file names. And we actually might have another webinar on this as well, because it seemed like an area where a lot of people had a lot to say. So Spencer and Peter both had examples for this. Spencer, why don't you go first since you're on a roll?
Thanks. All right. Hot folders is a great tool. If you're not familiar with it, that's something that's configured with your systems, but it allows you to set up a folder, local on a computer, typically on your desktop. And when content is added into there, the system is actively looking for new content and will pick it up and ingest it into the system. With regards to file systems, this is also something that we've done, is that we've structured, because we get a lot of product imagery for a lot of our clients, is we've built out folder structures that, starting with kind of a more broad term and going into a more specific term, allow you to kind of walk the user through where those files would reside, and make it as a quick way for somebody to go in and look for content for a folder system. And one reason why we also did that is because the DAM that we're using is one that will take folder structure and take each folder that you have to go through to get to the asset and turn each of those folder names into a keyword that you can also search by later. And so there are times where, again, 90% of the imagery that we get submitted by our vendors and clients have no realistic file name to them, nothing that you could ever distinguish from. I can't tell you how many files are labeled unknown -2, 3, 4, 3, a bazillion, or IMG underscore whatever, and that in and of itself gives you no information to search by, let alone remember, because again, for us, clients very commonly will go back 2 months, 2 years, and say, hey, there's this image we use, we want to find it again, and we want to use it again. And what most of our team really only knows is the job name or the job number in which it was initially used by or last used by. And so those are key things that are in our folder structure that can be searched by later, is just by simply typing in a job number, finding the asset within that job folder, and retrieving it very quickly that way. So
that's a great method. It obviously requires planning up front. So I have a question at the end that I'll hit you up with about that.
Yeah, just some things to sort of add to what Spencer has brought up, that just a hierarchical folder structure is probably the original sort of fountain that DAM sprung from. You know, it was people looking for ways to organize content and digital files, and the very first, you know, attempt at that was building a folder structure on a server somewhere where people could centralize, you know, their assets to share with other users or other people. So that being said, that hierarchical folder structure generally would provide a context for a lot of those assets. You could probably have a parent folder called client, and then underneath it, a folder with the name of each client. And it would be pretty obvious that you would put client A's content in their folder, and you'd come up with subfolders to help break it apart and categorize it. So certainly in an ingestion process, you can build a folder structure that mirrors much of that and capture it. But where I've found that it becomes most advantageous is when you have a lump of existing content that was actually organized using those methods. So you're going to have all of these files that somebody has been hoarding on a server or even on their desktop, but they've gone to the trouble to already organize it in a folder, and have it, rather than having to recreate all of that information. There's a lot of tips and tricks and tools that you can use to actually, you know, run a command that will gather not just the file name of everything in that folder structure, but the entire path or each folder that it belongs to. And then you can use that information once it's captured to reassociate with the file once you put it into a DAM system. So for example, when I've put in the first DAM solution for a number of clients, they come to me and say, well, we have all our files on this hard drive. And I look at it and it's all nicely organized into folders. And you can run like a list files and directories command. And you now have a text file that has every file name, including each folder that it was put in. And if you massage that and parse that out, you can probably extract, you know, what client each file belonged to and what job number potentially each file belonged to. So there's a lot of things you can do to sort of maintain information from an asset that is coming to you from a folder structure. And a lot of ways you can leverage that. I won't go into all the details, but the idea is that there's information there, and a lot of times you can take advantage of it.
Well, the other thing to keep in mind is it's definitely, like, to me, especially if you don't have much of an existing DAM in play, it's kind of the foundational place to start with organizing your content. So when you're ready to put it into your DAM, you have it organized, but also that as like for us, our users relied on that folder structure to know how to get to content until we put the DAM in play to help for searchability. Because we didn't have the DAM in play when I first got here. And so the first thing I had to do was set that foundation and make it consistent across all of our clients so people could easily walk through that folder structure and know where to go look. It still wasn't very effective in certain regards when people couldn't remember a job name or a job number, but it was a lot cleaner going, I have a general idea of where to go find it.
This is great. In the interest of time, we're going to move on to the next method, but like I said, definitely we're going to have another webinar on this topic. Excellent. So importing and mapping metadata from spreadsheets.
Yeah, so I had myself on mute.
That's
Maybe,
okay.
Yeah, maybe David would like to speak a little bit about the metadata from spreadsheets.
Well, there's a number of ways that you can leverage this. I think one of the first things I got involved with the Stock Artist Alliance was there at the time, a lot of people were outsourcing keywording of their images to places overseas where they'd essentially send out stuff with a thumbnail or a preview image, and they'd get back a list of keywords and tied to whatever that file name was, but then they wanted to embed those into the files or get them into their digital asset management system. Most of them were not dealing with high-end DAM, so they were usually wanting to get it back into the file itself so that it could go on someplace else. And there are a number of ways of doing that. The one of the things I've used the most is a program called Photo Mechanic, which has the ability to take a tab delimited file, and you can basically take that and stick it into the program and use something called code replacement, and then just set up a basically a metadata template where you're referencing that, and so it'll look for in column 1 the name of the file, and then you tell it, you put the keywords into column 2, and it will grab those and stuff those into the image itself. And then if you ingest that image into your DAM, it'll have all of those keywords with it. In addition to that, there's IPTC and Plus worked on something they call a metadata toolkit, which works within Bridge. And what it's very handy for is you can take a large number of images and export out all the metadata from those images into essentially a spreadsheet format. It's I think it's comma separated value, but there's different options for you to export from Bridge. You can take that, put all that information into a spreadsheet form or other tools that you're used to using, and you can use that to normalize data. So I know I've worked with large image sets before, and so depending on even the same person may over time have put maybe the state abbreviations for locations instead of the full name, or different abbreviations for things. And so you'll look through it, and they're basically all the same thing, but they have 2 or 3 different values. So you want to generally make those all the same. You can make those in the spreadsheet all the way that you want them, and then through the same tool you can bring those back in through Bridge and have it embedded back into the original images, and then go from there.
Well, this technique is also commonly used if you're transitioning from one DAM to another DAM, especially when you think about organizations that are growing or moving to a more maybe appropriate solution. That's one of the most common techniques to pull out, especially if you're dealing with custom metadata.
That's true, yeah, and with some of the custom things, you may need to map it into a different field or something like that. But some of I know I've been surprised over the years, some of the higher end dams actually don't have great facilities for pushing the information back into the original file. So in some cases, what you end up with is extracting, either taking a spreadsheet out of the original dam, moving all the images over, then figuring out how to map that spreadsheet into the new dam, or the alternative is you can map it and push it back into the original files and then just ingest them into the new dam. So Deb, one thing I was going to say too, there's some URLs for some of these things that I don't know if there's something afterwards that goes out or gets tied in with the video or whatever, but we can make those available.
Sure, absolutely. We can post them on the site and distribute them out, no problem.
I was just going to put in 2 examples. So if you're a book publisher, I worked with one where basically they had a lot, tens of thousands of assets that were in books that were previously published. They had art logs for all those books. The rights have been cleared for all those images. So again, as David was saying, you have a column where you have the file name, and then you have the other columns with the other data. So the caption, the figure number, the chapter of it, the publication, including the rights information in this case, which had all been vetted. So that can say, if you have something where you already have been logging and you have that data in spreadsheets, for legacy assets, that's a great way to sort of marry up those 2 things and not rekey it and not have to revet that sort of information.
Sweet. Okay, next up in complexity is importing and mapping metadata from custom XMP panels. XMP technology was born out of Adobe's efforts, and I believe is now an ISO standard.
Parts of it are.
Parts of it, okay. So I believe, Spencer, this was one idea that you had examples of that you wanted to share.
Yeah, so a lot of technology or DAM solutions give you the ability to create custom XMP data, and why this may become beneficial is because this is where it allows you to create data fields that are unique to your organization that again are allow you to have now your organization based lingo that people are going to search by. Because again, you take the example of an image has been supplied by a vendor with a random file name of img_3425, but you know, it may be a client specific or a company specific product. You can go in and maybe there's specific lingo that your company uses to refer to that content that you can now tag it with. And you can go ahead and if your DAM allows you, which I believe most of them would, but I can't speak for all of them, they would allow you the ability to actually embed that. The trick to XMP custom data is making sure that you create your own unique namespace. So that way, when you're looking through the raw data, it is being referenced as your custom data. And that way you can tell and distinguish it. The challenge with it is most other applications aren't necessarily going to be able to know that it's there in a way to extract it out without any sort of programming. But at least that metadata can travel with the asset in the event it ever leaves and comes back to your DAM that's configured to look for it. So there's some benefit there. It can be a little tricky. So
the one alternative to that too is there are in the illustration that Deb's put up there is something I'd put together to try and help people understand. But even today, there's an awful lot of things now in what's called the new IPTC extension, which cover a lot of specific needs of institutions, especially cultural heritage institutions, artwork and object of the image and things like that. The problem is that a lot of the current DAMs aren't leveraging this, so that information might be in the image, but they don't allow you to necessarily see it directly. If you dig into the actual file itself, it might be there, but it's not getting extracted and mapped. So that's one thing you probably want to check before you bring in a bunch of images, is to see if some of that might already be there. But there's also the tool I mentioned earlier, the IPTC Plus metadata toolkit actually has, I think there's 10 or 20 quote unquote custom fields within the Plus namespace where you could actually tag something. And for those that don't want to set up their own custom namespace, it's a way that other people could see that. If they're both using Bridge, you could put stuff in with that toolkit into those quote unquote custom namespaces, but when somebody else opens it up, all they have to do is install that same panel and they'd be able to see the same information. So it's kind of quasi-custom, I guess you'd call it.
Excellent. Well, I know who I'm calling if I have questions.
Just one word of caution to sort of throw out on this, because I think there are really two schools of thought on the metadata being embedded in the file. And I know that different approaches will work for different institutions or different people. The idea is if you create an asset and you have information at that time and you can put it into the asset, it's a great way to then pass that asset on to the next place it's going to be used. So a photographer providing it to a client, and then they put it in their DAM, and all of the information that's needed is in the file, the DAM can read it out. However, once it's within your DAM, a lot of that information can be dynamic rather than static. So information will change over time, and anyone that retrieves an asset out of the DAM, sends it off to an advertising agency for some work or something like that, it's very easy for the information embedded in the file to get out of sync with what is actually stored in the system. So you have to always be aware that the only instance of where the information is considered to be truly current or accurate is going to be in the DAM itself. And once you write it, that's really a snapshot. It's not continually updated, and you have to just be aware of that in all of the processes that you become dependent on the information existing in the file, as compared to the idea of a DAM being your single source.
So one other thing, and I think this kind of plays into the next slide, I think, is we're talking about, database and scripting, is that you take a combination of spreadsheets, mix it with XMP custom data fields, and add a little bit of scripting sauce, we'll call it, for your recipe here. And this is where you the three play together for your more effective automation. And this is something we did at the last place, the corporate retailer that I worked for. We had a custom built FileMaker Pro database that would receive huge Excel CSV files with all sorts of data about the product that we were photographing in-house. That would then tie through to our system and embed that as metadata in the custom XMP data fields that we were able to map to in our DAM. So then when the assets were processed from the production set up into the DAM, that information would be embedded, and then the DAM would be able to read it as custom data field, and that metadata was already there and inputted, all because it originated from a CSV that was supplied, prior to production even beginning. But the other option is that, going back to my current example now of a required upload form, is that some of this data, again, is agency specific, like a job number. I don't care if anybody can see that outside of the agency, because that job number is unique to the agency. The client doesn't need to know it or be able to reference it per se, or anybody else after that point. It is completely internal for us. And so, but to have that be required as a custom XMP data field that can be read by the DAM later is a benefit and helps automate that input, because the user who's supplying it is filling that out for me, so I don't have to try and figure that out later.
That sounds pretty sweet.
Yeah, no, if you have the resources available that can put together, like as Spencer calls it, the scripting sauce, and you can build tools to leverage custom programming and doing if this then that type of logic and tying multiple systems together, you can build some incredibly powerful automation. I've been a part of that in different points in my career. One of them, a large photography studio that serviced multiple clients, each coming in on any given day to shoot one or more jobs, referencing, product shots and things like that. So individual products would have their own product ID number, and they would leverage a whole combination of file or folder structures, to help convey information about what was being shot, file name, so that the first 5 letters might be the client code with an underscore separating it from the product ID number. And then a script could actually utilize all of that initial information, query a database that contained additional information specific to that client, and then as it ingested the asset, fill in 25 product-specific fields and target job numbers, including potential star ratings that were done on set to dictate whether it was automatically sent offshore for retouching, and to what degree or what level, and where it was supposed to return to. So you can really leverage a lot of the things that we've already talked about and put them all together to create some really complex and powerful automation that can do much of the metadata association to assets, as well as drive workflow processes at the same time. So there's some really neat things to do if you have those type of resources available to you.
It's great stuff. Let's move on to capture metadata from systems of record.
Excellent. I'll take this one real quick. I know in my own career, I have been in a position of having to enter the same metadata over and over in multiple different places. So ideally, one of the best practices moving into the integration space and moving up in complexity is capturing that metadata from another system that is considered the system of record of authority for that particular type of data. And for this one, Mark, why don't you go first?
Yes, so if you work in a place that has a lot of product-related data and you're putting in a DAM, then the point of tonight's webinar is really to look at ways to avoid keying metadata, because nobody likes to key metadata. So whether it's from a spreadsheet, the file name, the folder structure, we talked about the database as maybe a method of input. A sort of ultimate thing is that you have a set of data that lives somewhere else and is that source of record. And for that sort of integration, if you're looking for a new system, you want to talk very carefully with the vendor about how that's going to work. With some systems, you can, instead of import, you can reference this data. So you can do a lookup, bring it over, and have it read only. And I'll give you an example. So we worked at Hachette, and they publish books, right? So they have book jackets, they have book interiors, they have illustrations inside that, you have InDesign files, you got lots of artwork. And for all those books, they have a PIM, we'll call it, an information database of all the information that goes to Amazon for the retail. So they have the title, the subtitle, the author, you know, dozens of fields. It was like 72 fields. So if you can have a method by which the graphics coming in, the book jackets, all that information is looked up maybe on the ISBN plus another key possibly, you can then pull in from the other system all that metadata in the same way that Peter was talking about. So product information, go look out somewhere else and then overlay that so that all those assets, when I go in and I find that job, I'm seeing all those other things right there based on that lookup, maybe on a product ID. And that would be true if you're in retail, you're going to be using a SKU number. If you're at a you know, consumer goods manufacturer, you've got product IDs. It could be campaigns that you have in marketing. Whatever it is, the idea is that you can make some sort of integration and pull that over to overlay on the assets so that you want to be sure that you have the accurate information. And if it lives somewhere else as a system of record, you don't want to duplicate it in a way that people can edit and conflict with it.
You know, the other thing to think about when looking at the metadata that you're going to pull from is making sure that you're considering the data for all end users of your dam, either current or potential. Because the caveat that I've come across with in multiple scenarios is that you know, upper management or those that are kind of financing the implementation will say, well, eventually we want group X to use it. Maybe not today, but in 6 months or a year from now. And when you, and the problem is if you don't take them into consideration, especially from a metadata standpoint of how are they going to search for content, then when that year comes and you do want to try and make it valuable, but you didn't put any of that metadata in, you've now got to go back and, oh my gosh, talk about somewhat of an impossible project to go back just because you didn't want to put that information in up front because you weren't ready for that end user to do it or to access it today. You got to make sure that you're also thinking about what terminology or how your end users are going to look at it. Because again, example for us as an ad agency, you know, if we eventually want our clients to use our DAM or leverage our DAM to find their own content, how are they going to search for it? Well, they're not going to search by our job number because they're not going to know our job number. They're going to know more by a job name because that's how they refer to it all the time. Or if it's a specific product, by the product name or model number or color or whatever. But you've got to make sure you keep into consideration all potential end users of the system and that you're pulling in the metadata that's appropriate and beneficial to them.
That's one of the big takeaways in David Diamond's the Dam Survival book.
Have it, read it, love it.
Well highlighted.
I just need to get it autographed.
There we go. I'll get you an autographed copy. But yeah, and one other sort of big arena that Deb's probably got a wealth of information she could share if we had time. But you know, we talk about marketing and publishing and product, but a lot of that also just libraries in general, museums with like TMS numbers and things like that. There are whole standards out there that also use like an identification number to reference individual objects or parts of a collection or thing like that. So it's a fairly universal concept that goes far beyond, you know, the sort of like that marketing or product information niche as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, other industries already, like you said, already have standards because they're in that niche of certain industry verticals. So their solutions are just natively supporting certain integrations. The key in my experience has been data validation. That's really the issue, which is a whole other
So
webinar.
making sure they entered the number correctly, you mean?
Which system is going to validate the data? Can it validate, you know, and yeah, ultimately governance and error messages and, you know, really mapping out what happens during that connection.
Yeah, those oftentimes, if you're referring to registries, one of the things there, I know the new IPTC extension does have a key for both the registry name and the ID for that particular registry. So if you're working with it, you know, digital object identifiers or other specific industry ones, if you've got a registry for that, you can actually put that in and can even be expressed as a URL.
Right. I hope we're going there, that more vendors.
I think eventually everything's going to be interconnected.
Yeah. Great. So segueing into the next slide, similar to integrating with another system of record is very common use case of integrating with a workflow system, because as most people know or soon realize once they implement a DAM system, one system will not manage your assets through their entire life cycle, no matter what a vendor tries to tell you. So a lot of creative operations professionals use different programs for creative approval and markup, and then those assets need to make their way into the DAM and maintain integrity throughout that integration. So I believe Mark had some experience with different publishing workflow systems. I've worked with a lot of packaging or product life cycle management tools. They're all really what a lot of people term works in progress DAMs or WIP DAMs, but they're specialized for workflow. So Mark, do you want to expand on that?
Yeah, if you are, a lot of what we talked about tonight, I'm getting a new system, or maybe I have a system and I've got these assets laying around and I want to load them in. What we're talking about here with workflow is going forward, how am I going to make sure that I don't have to go back and, conjure up from, stuff that was done? What can I do just as the normal course of production to have metadata that gets entered as part of production going in automatically, so that everything that is going out the door from a production standpoint, all that metadata that's captured is going in to the DAM. In publishing, at least in the US, most magazine publishers are either using Woodwing Enterprise or Vune's K4. At MEI, both of those systems can basically output a little XML job ticket with the asset that can then be loaded into the DAM. So it highlights for children, they used Intermedia. At McGraw-Hill, they use Documentum and Artesia. At America's Test Kitchen, they use Canto. At Condé Nast, they use AEM. At ARP, they use Telescope. And also what they do as part of the production is you may have both print and web people involved in this. So people may be putting in alternative headlines, because the copy can go in as well as your graphics. So alternative headlines, even some people put tweets in the metadata fields and use that during the workflow. So anything that you can put in, obviously in publishing, you're putting in the publication, you're putting in, for your images, your captions, your credits, that sort of information. So the part of the workflow is different people go in workflow. Maybe it's approval, checkboxes, whatever that is. And it just means that you don't have to then go and rekey that in the DAM, and you can hook it up like a hose filling up a swimming pool, right? All that stuff coming out of production is filling up the DAM with good metadata.
Yeah, and there'll also be, just to the same type of systems you're speaking to, Mark, where a DAM will feed those systems with content, and then actions will happen on that content. But then when you go back to the DAM in the future to reference that asset, you want a better idea of its history, and the ability of those systems to transfer the history of what happened externally back to the asset in the DAM is really critical. And a lot of the better DAMs out there build integrations into common platforms such as CMS systems and PIM systems and things like that, so that they can exchange information when actions are taken on those assets, whether it's approval, publishing, use on a website, delivery to an end user, or any of those type of objects. So it's that information that can be very valuable in terms of statistics, because if the dam is your central repository, it can sort of amalgamate or combine all of those statistics from the separate systems and give you, again, that sort of single source, not just for the assets, but also the activity on them.
Right. So people get a dam because they want reuse on an asset. They spent money for intellectual property. You want to get value back from it. So some publishers will, that reuse, a derivative asset, right? If it ends up in a book, it may not be the exact same ISBN, right? It may be, it may have been reprinted, may have been something slightly different. So you can do, we talked about XMP. You can inject something, identify it as new, and give it a little maybe unique identifier. On export, insist that you be able to inject that into the asset. So we talked about the risk of not putting stuff back out into it. And then when it comes back in, your little routine of ingestion is looking to see if there's an ID there. And if there is, it recognizes it. Let's call it a family ID if you want. You can then associate those two together so that you have the original, and then all the other little derivatives that may have been done from people downloading and retouching or cropping, whatever they did to change it and bring it back in. So absolutely, that can assist in having some accuracy around not only how many were downloaded, but if assets came back in, and sometimes people do want to keep all those derivatives, still being able to associate those together.
Well, the other thing to think about with WIP, and this is when I hear WIP, this is what I always associate it with, is that the files involved have to go through rounds of approval before they can be approved to go out the door. And a WIP dam will allow for user visibility, accessibility, based on approval status or process or point in that approval process. We would go and do photo shoots where we'd come back with thousands of images where that the designer who was going to be the one to actually drop it into layout couldn't see it until the creative director had given it as a select status, and then the creative director, the person above them, had to then tag it as approved. And only once the asset had both of those values checked could the designer then actually see and access and download and use that asset. And even then, they could only download a proof watermarked version because it still had to go through rounds of retouching. So there's multiple pieces to a WIP dam that have to work together for, in my mind, to be one that's more of a WIP dam versus your traditional final asset dam. I think there's never really thought about classifying as two different types of dam. I mean, dam is dam in my mind, but now that we talk about it, they're kind of, I guess, those different types of dam, if you will.
Yeah, I've worked with systems that are half workflow, half repository, and the same kind of thing. So that's why this slide came after the previous slide, because it's a little more complex when you have one or two systems and all those different types of parameters.
Deb, why don't we keep this moving? We really like to get some questions. Why don't we hit the last slide, maybe have David speak on this, and then hopefully take some questions from the live audience. David, do you want to talk to us a little bit about artificial intelligence?
Well, I think this is where the future is headed. I mean, there's already some pieces and parts that are here. There are some proofs of concept that are in the works. There was a webinar just the other day with one of the dam vendors that has integrated this in, and they're working with Clarify, which is one of the artificial intelligence services, to automatically tag images. So it's stuff is flying around on the internet in the background. You're able to work through the dam, and you can essentially select which images you want to send out, and something is sent out. They send you back a list of keywords for each of those images. You can accept or reject them, and then the payment is tied in with the number that you're actually using. This is one of the first integrated things that I've seen like that, and I think we'll probably see a lot more. There's the Google Vision API is out there now. Amazon just released something they're calling Recognize, along with a couple of other applications that work within the AWS network. Microsoft has some other things, as well as not image facial recognition setups and things like that. So there are all these things that are coming. Some of them are kind of here, but they may be tied to specific things. But I know we were discussing back and forth on this. One of the things that I think that's important for people to recognize is that this may or may not work for your particular situation. If you're doing general images, you might be able to get a few keywords out of it that are useful to help people find stuff. If you're doing, just cars or just products on a white background, the tags that you might be getting from these AI systems may not really be all that useful. And so it's something that you'll need to spend some time testing, but it could be very worthwhile.
I'd actually like to add, I was listening to a webinar this morning with another vendor who's now integrated some AI auto tagging into their system. And one thing that I shamefully hadn't thought about was how that mass amount of keywords that are typically just dumped into another field or something, how it impacts your search or information retrieval. So you've got a bunch of keywords that may or may not be relevant, and depending on what you do with them, it's not always great to have so many keywords. It might affect the position.
It could pollute it.
Yeah, exactly.
It could end up polluting it. Yeah, and I think that's one of the things too. Is there's artificial intelligence that may be suggesting things, but I think really where these work the best is as kind of workflow accelerators, where the analogy I usually use is, if you ask somebody to write an article and they're staring at a blank sheet of paper, they have a really hard time. If you give somebody an article and say, here, edit this,
right,
most people don't have a problem. So if you can give somebody who's got a keyword, 10,000 images, and you can say, here are these 10,000 images, they each have 4 or 5 keywords each, take a look at them, reject the ones that don't make sense, add those that you think that need to be in there. All of a sudden it becomes a lot more, an easier task for a lot of people.
Sure.
I saw one damn vendor demo this technology, different from the one that you and I were talking about yesterday. And that was how theirs worked, is that they would have your keyword panel, and if you were that user that was stuck on thinking, what should I put in here, but I know it needs more than the one I've given it, you can prompt it to give suggestions and decide yes, yes, no. And again, like you said, use it as just to kind of fuel that fire of what to put in there and get your mind thinking.
It's a great way to have that hybrid approach.
Yeah, and I think we've done some some work with it in my environment, and I think it does a fairly excellent job in like very general or generic descriptive terms. So it can recognize car, building, maybe man or woman, or even model, something like that. However, you put a picture of the Eiffel Tower in front of it, it's very unlikely that it's going to actually come up with Eiffel Tower. And if you come up with an even less landmarked, building, it's not going to recognize that this is the Wells Fargo Bank on the corner of 6th and Broadway, which is what people would hope that it would be able to do. And
although now that you mentioned the names like that, actually there's a fellow I know out in California, Roger Howard, who's been working on this, and he's actually he's done some tests with OCR stuff where it will pick up the words that are in photos and automatically pull those in, and then he can choose to use those as additional metadata. But it can see street signs, it can see names on businesses and things like that, and that may be enough to help you find something.
Yeah, no, and I think a lot of this is coming, but the idea is that it's still in its infancy, and so therefore there are some benefits that can be derived today, but it's not something that you can put a dependency on to take over from what a human being would do.
Oh yeah, we're in the early adoption phase.
Yeah, Apple iOS just deployed face recognition in their own Photos app now. Is you can go into your Photos app and it will group images with similar faces together and allow you to search your own photos for people that commonly show up in your photo reel.
Yeah, if you have public data sets too, like you were saying, Peter, about maybe not knowing that it's the Eiffel Tower. Well, if you can bring that GPS data together with map data, some systems can actually match those together and make inferences.
If you have GPS, there actually are reverse geo-encoded
Right.
systems where you can essentially take the GPS and it can tell you, location, city, state, country for that particular spot.
Yeah, and a lot of that is really going to work in context, and that's even true of like the voice recognition software. The reason all of those digital assistants where you can talk to your phone or your little Bluetooth speaker and ask it to order you something or what the weather is, it's because it has a very narrow context, and therefore that helps it filter down the words to interpret, what question you're asking and why. You'll often get responses from those devices. I'm sorry, I can't speak to that. And it's because they don't really have the sort of background to deal with more than just a few contexts.
That context is.
I'm just going to interrupt. I'm just going to say we're going to open up to some questions. Open up the chat. Open up the raise the hand to see if anybody would like to join the panel and access their video and maybe ask some questions directly, if not chat. Just an unbelievable wealth of knowledge on this panel and so much to talk about. We have somebody asking regarding auto tagging technology. He's telling us to take a look for interviews of companies that offer machines-generated metadata compared to human-generated keyword services.
That's a good point. A lot of times vendors will say, we do automated tagging, and you really need to ask what that means, and the consequences for that in your workflow and your budget and everything else.
Context is really important. I mean, Peter mentioned that. I mean, if you're a legal firm and you have to get ready for a trial and go through 50,000 documents, scanning those documents into a system and OCRing stuff and so forth, it's perfectly fine because you wouldn't be able to get through that humanly without it. On the other hand, if you have assets where it's really important that you not have bad tags in it, and maybe your set's a little smaller and your volume is such that you really have to check it, then there are risks, obviously, to applying it to an engine and having it apply all this metadata that do you have the bandwidth to QA that to make sure it's good?
Excellent.
I have a general question because it seems like our attendees or viewers are a little shy. Actually, well, Henrik, you beat me to it. Henrik's asking, has the adoption of properly applying metadata improved in the past decade or two?
I think that goes back to what many of us have been saying all along, that, especially Mark, anything anyone can do to avoid having to key data is that sort of goal that everyone strives for. So the idea of automating it to take that responsibility away from people is still as much a goal today as it has been for the last decade or two. And we have more tools to help us. We've recognized the value in it, but yeah, I think that most people still see it as an additional task outside of their regular job unless they are in a dedicated role for managing the content in a system. So yeah, it's still a very tough challenge to get people to properly tag it, and especially the people that would know how best to tag it because they know the content. They're too busy creating it to worry about tagging it when they put it into a system.
Very true. I had that conversation with a creative the other day when I was talking about it, and I was showing them about putting in keywords and using proper file management strategy that we have at the agency, and they said, I don't have time to do this kind of stuff. And I said, well, first of all, I thought you were a professional. Professionals do things, right. And second of all, if you're telling me you don't have time to do your job right, let me go get the COO who's hired me and says that it has to be done, and you can tell him that you don't have the time, and let's see how that conversation goes. And he goes, and he quickly retracts and go, okay, I'll do it.
Governance.
Yeah,
It takes clarity for people to understand that part of what we're doing is being supported, and people need to know that it's being supported to convince them to participate. But his common phrase with me since day one is that people have been, they want their cake and eat it too, but it's that idea that they want the results of an effective dam, but they don't want to put in the effort to tag it properly or give it a reasonable name to find it later. So, which is it? And
in my experience, things have not improved over the last couple decades, and that's because a couple decades ago, the people that had a dam were people that knew why they had one, and librarians were involved in making sure that metadata was good. And today, there's just so much more digital media. We didn't have to deal with Pinterest and a zillion other, social media sites where, picture heavy, video heavy. The explosion of digital assets means there's a lot more of it, and only so many librarians really paying attention to it. So I think it's an ongoing challenge.
The other part that people don't realize how much they're actually spending or wasting on trying to recreate content. They're just of the mindset, I can't find it, I'm going to recreate it. And it's just been such a, what's the word I'm looking for? But it's been such an ongoing bad habit for years now, that it's only until you've got a system in play that saves them that time, and you can start accounting those examples of where you've saved them that cost, that they start to see that benefit. But I know that's one of those bad habits, is people have just gotten into the mentality that I'll just recreate it.
Or if you have a lawsuit because you don't have the rights information in the system. Right. A lot of companies, that's why they get a dam.
Well, what Spencer was saying is something the writer Kurt Vonnegut picked up on years ago, which was, there's a quote that I use. It's another flaw in the human character is that everybody wants to build and nobody wants to do maintenance.
That's a good one.
Everyone, it was a quick hour. We can't thank you enough for your time and just the incredible amount of information and wealth of knowledge. Keep the questions coming. They're starting to flow in. We will rally them and pass them on to the panelists on here. Even for people that are watching this video after this live event, please feel free to contact NewJerseyDam@gmail.com. For more questions, future topics, be a part of future panels. This panel is going to be tough to beat. But everyone, Peter, David, Mark, Spencer, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Frank.
Thank you guys.
Yeah.
Deb,
Thanks.
as always, a pleasure. And everybody, we'll see you real soon. And we'll be doing a meetup face-to-face in New Jersey soon after that. Everybody, happy holidays, and we'll see you soon.
Take care.
Bye.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.
All right, bye-bye.